I'm making my own nativity. I've been felting it for years. I'm hoping it'll be ready before I die. And there are magi and sheep.
Just keep your magi separate.
Yeah,
put them,
cluster them over
yeah,
one
over to the
side.
east. It is officially Advent. We are coming up on the second Sunday of Advent,
Yeah.
and we are taking a slight shift from the narrative lectionary this Sunday. Why? What is going on? Okay, Reverend Thorne, Reverend Keat, Word Made Fresh, you know the drill. What is happening this Sunday, and why are we abandoning the lectionary?
It's the Christmas pageant
okay,
this Sunday. I mean, it's a little early to talk about the birth of Jesus on the second Sunday of Advent, but this is the date that works for families. Maybe you guys have that same challenge too. But the baby's getting born on December 8th.
Baby's coming early.
That's right. That's right.
Call the midwife.
That's right. Call the midwife. But it's going to be a lot of fun. We have a pageant called The Version.
Matt and Mary's
Matt and
version.
Lucy's.
Matt and Lucy's version births.
Right.
Version.
Matt for Matthew and Lucy
For Luke.
For Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like a kid's understanding of the Gospels and how they would even, what are they talking about? What's a
Yes.
virgin birth?
Exactly. So there's two different versions of the birth story. The Matthew story and the Luke story, which are different.
Yes.
And you do this every year, your annual reminder.
Yes, I live right next to a church in my small town, and they are a slightly different theological flavor than we are. And they put, and I mean, all churches are guilty of this. You put the Magi with the sheep.
Right.
I really give them a harder time for the white-skinned baby Jesus because that's problematic. But the Magi and the sheep, those are two different stories.
Two different stories. I'm making my own nativity. I've been felting it for years. I'm hoping it'll be ready before I die. And there are Magi and sheep.
Just keep your Magi separate. Put them,
cluster them over.
yeah,
one
over to the
side.
east.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the Magi are in Matthew, the shepherds are in Luke. They are two different stories. In Luke, we get, the account is night of the birth, and so the shepherds come to that one. And there's lots of reasons why the shepherds are in Luke, this gospel written to the Gentiles that is all about bringing the outsider in. So the shepherds, who the outsiders are the first. There's a couple sermons there. And then Matthew, the Magi show up 3 years later, two years later. I keep saying 3, but it's 2. 2 years later, they find a baby, a kid in a home, not even in the manger scene anymore.
That's right. We did an epiphany pageant one year at my church. It was called Follow That Star. And Petal played the star. So she's just waddling down the aisle and the kings are chasing her.
That's
or
perfect.
the Magi.
Yeah. And I have a slight bias and agenda on these passages, as anyone who follows me on TikTok or Instagram knows every year. But I also love the Magi story because Matthew is writing and drawing in so many often Hebrew scriptures and prophecies. And then he brings in these people who aren't even from the Hebrew prophets. These are these foreign sorcerers and scientists who somehow could see something in the stars and follow it to find Christ, which I just think that's the sermon right there of the miracle of Christmas is you don't even have to be a part of this tradition to be caught up in the magic and God is doing something through it.
Somebody says they're Zoroastrians, right?
Yeah.
That part of the story. But yeah, I love where you're going with that. Just that this gospel and this story is big enough for all the people who want to be in it to be in it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like that. I think it should
follow that star.
And if you have your Magi with the same nativity as your shepherds, just push them off to the east to represent the 2-year journey they took.
Right.
There's also a third nativity story with a dragon.
Oh, it must be in the apocryphal text.
In Revelation.
Oh, in Revelation.
So Revelation kind of does another depiction of a birth story, and it would be drawing on it, and it has the dragon coming to devour the child. Mm-hmm. So I think you could also put dragons at your nativity if you want to be extra biblical. Okay, so that's my take on Matthew and Luke and all these things. Anything else we need to think about as we're just looking at these texts?
Well, I know when we talk about the shepherds, there are some commentators who have a lot to say about them being the outcast and the downtrodden, but there are others who take a different take on the shepherds. And I find that interesting. There's some people who say that we malign the shepherds by saying that they're these smelly, thieving outsiders. And that there might be another way to understand them. Maybe as nurturers and caregivers and those out in the field. The other thing to think about is shepherds are typically children, right? They're typically young people. So I think there's something beautiful and maybe justice-centric in that, to think that the first person who got the news were not the what do you call the religious leaders, the
Pharisees, Sadducees.
those people, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It wasn't the religious elites. It was the kids, the kind of little scruffy ones,
Sticky.
youngest
Sticking with
ones
my
in their
kids.
family. Like think about David,
Yeah.
who was kind of the youngest of all those boys, just out there doing their thing because what could that hurt? That they got to be the ones, and I think that gets us also thinking about kind of where children sit in the hierarchy of things in the world, but also in the church. That the angels choose them to be the ones who get the message first.
Whew. Well, I feel like, I know we don't get a sermon from you this Sunday, but there's going to be a sermon baked into just the embodiment of kids retelling this story in all the ways they will.
Right. And they're fantastic.
Yeah.
We have, I think, a really fantastic children and youth program here, church school program here at Riverside. I'm a little biased, but we've just made some changes that I think have really brought to life some things that have been traditional, but maybe not as effervescent as they could be. Children definitely bring the bubbly to church, and we're just so glad to have them as a part of worship.
So once upon a time at Riverside, maybe this is true at other churches, you would see kids on pageant Sunday.
Yeah.
And then maybe one other Sunday a year. For us, it was Children's Sabbath. Some churches do, Youth Sunday. There's a day when the kids take over and everyone gets uncomfortable. What are you doing in my church, says the grown-ups. That was Riverside for a while.
Yeah.
And then we began making some shifts where the first Sunday of the month, we would not have kids programming. And we would invite everyone, families, to come to the nave for the same service together, communion Sundays. We would do a message for all ages on the first Sundays only, thinking kids will be there. It worked sometimes. I feel like sometimes families were like, you're not really changing anything. You're just inviting me to come bring my kids to this grown-up experience. You want to watch my kid for me? But we don't do that anymore. What do we do now? What is the family and young person experience on a Sunday at Riverside?
Right. So the first 20 minutes or so of worship is now centered on children. Centered meaning they get to have an embodied expression. So they are part of the grand processional, the choir with pom-poms because, they need something to shake. And I think in that embodied processional, they help us to remember that worship is about praising God. We tend to walk in sort of somber with great regalness and pageantry. But the kids kind of, bop in with the sort of joy that I think you imagine Jesus had when he said, let the children come. They come however they want to come, right? They're walking, they're running, maybe they trip and fall, they get up, they're laughing. They're just a wiggling embodiment of praise. So the choir processes it, the clergy process it, and then here come the children. And it's one of the best and most delicious things about worship. They get to sit in the front row, which we reserve seats for them. We've got bags for them full of things to delight them if what's happening in front is not particularly engaging. The way many of us grew up in church, we just had to kind of figure out how to be there. Well, we've got things for them to engage them if there's something that they can't quite figure out how to be there. Children lead in worship. They lead the call to worship. They read scripture. We have a message for all ages that is tailored for that age group. And a lot of the adults say, after you do that message, we could just end church right then. It's so good. We could just go.
We do that every single week.
We do that every single Sunday now. And after that message, the children process out to go to their age appropriate church school to learn more about the text that they heard read, to do some coloring, to have a snack, and to be in community. It's one of the best things, and I think one of the things I'm the most proud of that we as a collective community of faith were able to do. It is transforming the faith life of all ages at the Riverside Church, and I think saying to our children, you belong here. This space is for you, and our hope is ultimately that they will be formed in such a way that they stay. What we often hear from churches is a lament. Where are all the children? Where do they go after they grow up? And it is hard to imagine that anyone would stay in a place that doesn't make space for them to be a part of as they are growing and being formed. Well, we're changing all of that here in the hopes that children will grow up to be adults who feel that there's a place for them in this institution that a lot of people say is dying, but we don't believe that.
mean, when you hear the pitter-patter of young people's footsteps and their voices and little giggles running through the halls, running up for the message for all ages, please don't trip on these stairs, it is full of life. And I think there's got to be a correlation. We're seeing our children's program have more and more people there. Not that bodies in the room are the metric to measure, but they're measurable. They tell us a story. And I think there has to be a correlation. When you hide the kids in the back room, go over to your space, it's hard for a flower to grow if you just keep it in a dark closet all the time.
Right.
But when you bring it to the space filled with light and everyone surrounding it, of course, families are going to be like, oh, my kid can be a part of this. I want to check this out.
Yes.
And every week at the end of the Message for All Ages, we say, if you have a kid in worship today that would like to be a part of this, head to the narthex, and our education team is there to help you. So the transition is even built in for a new family. How do I even find the kid's place?
Right. It's really been dynamic and delicious. And I want to say also, I think that our church school is not necessarily a dark closet.
No.
We have
it's not the big room with the big windows.
It's not the big room with the window. And the story that I often love to tell, and you might take this to your church and to your families as well. I did a bit of research on this in seminary because I started in the church as a youth minister. And I remember reading an article where the children were being ushered out, actually downstairs to the children's rooms, which were beautifully painted and appointed. And one little girl gets to the door and she turns around and she says, why do all the grown-ups get to stay upstairs with God? And we have to go downstairs to the basement. And what you have to remember about children is that they're very literal. And there's an understanding that big church is better, that it matters more. I mean, that's where we put all of our resources. The organ is in there. It's not in the church school room. The dancers, when we have them in, are in the nave. They're not in the church school room. So to create worship for 20 or 30 minutes that is delicious and engaging and dynamic and plays to the different sensory needs of children is not only good for children, it's also good for grown-ups.
It's good for all of us. We all continue to learn in those ways.
That's right.
So this Sunday has a little bit extra with the pageant.
Yep.
But what I love is that it's a familiar space for the kids.
Right.
It is not like what is this room? It's oh yeah, I know this space. Yeah. That's my seat right there.
That's right. I hang out here all the time. I know these people. It's going to be amazing.
It's going to be great. It's going to be great. All right, so that's this Sunday. We had a fun little, tangent on why every church should celebrate and center children in worship. I think we both share that bias, and I'm really glad it's come to life at Riverside. There is some credit when you have a senior minister who's on board. I know a lot of you, if you're the kids pastor, but I have to convince somebody. Show them this video, tell them the senior minister of the Riverside Church said so, and you can at least start the conversation.
Right. And it might not look the same for you, and it may be that starting one Sunday a month is a good entry point.
Oh, yeah.
And then maybe you go to 2. But ultimately, I do think God intends for the people to be together, and that means all the people. And again, might not be the whole 60 to 90-minute worship, but maybe there's a place every Sunday where community can be community together. Because again, as our colleague, the Reverend Amanda Meisenheimer said, if the children and adults don't learn to worship together, the children won't learn to worship at all. They learn from us. Yeah. The reason we know so many hymns, the reason we know so many prayers is because we were in worship. Because the songs that are being sung in church school very often are different from the great hymnody of the church. And we want our kids to know those rhythms, those songs, those prayers, and to engage them and love them in faith community.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you are a family with kids, and you're in the New York area, you should come to Riverside because we've got a lot going on that you can be a part of every single week. This Sunday in particular is the pageant. It might be too late for a family to get their kids in the pageant this Sunday, but I bet we could make you a sheep if we needed to.
I'm sure Minister Healy would be more than happy to give you a sheep costume.
Just tell him Jim and Adrienne sent you.
Yeah.
So that's all happening this Sunday. Worship starts, special music 10:30. Worship kind of gets rolling around 11 in the room, online, trcnyc.org. We got lots going on. Advent is happening. Candlelight is the following week. Look that up on the website. Get your tickets in the room, online. That's going to be a recurring theme. You can join us wherever, however you are. And we will be back with more of this, talking about the third Sunday in Advent next week. Okay.